Text. Melbourne Fringe respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work, play, and hold our festival. We acknowledge that the oldest living culture in the world has been kept alive by a rich and continuing history of storytelling, music, dance, art, and language. We pay our respects to the people of the Kulin Nations and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island elders, past and present, who maintain an enduring spiritual and cultural connection to the land. Sovereignty was never ceded. The following is a 75-minute film recorded over Zoom in gallery display. The conversation is hosted by Caroline Bowditch alongside 3 panellists, Professor Bree Hadley, Michelle Ryan, and Jo Verrent. Title: Melbourne Fringe Radical Access Conversations. How do we tell them they're crap?
Hi everyone, and welcome to the 3rd conversation in the Melbourne Fringe's Radical Access Conversations. My name is Caroline Bowditch and I am currently the Cultural Equity Consultant at Melbourne Fringe Festival. I have brand new blonde hair that's cut very short and I'm wearing red glasses, and I have very full-looking bookshelves behind me which are completely fake. They're wallpaper, but don't they look effective? So the secret's out. This conversation tonight is titled, How Do We Tell Them They're Crap? And we'll be focusing on the importance of critical feedback and genuine allyship. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm coming to you from, the Boon Wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I want to acknowledge what an honour it is to be continuing to share and exchange stories on these lands where this has happened for over 65,000 years. And a brief introduction to the Radical Access Conversation series. Radical Access imagines a radical version of the best practice accessibility for the independent arts sector and moves the conversation beyond the provision of access services into cultural equity. Radical Access is a provocation for change and a call for accelerated action. It aims to significantly increase access and inclusion for deaf and disabled artists across the independent arts sector and to have real impact on the lives and careers of all independent artists and arts workers and also audiences. Tonight, it is my complete pleasure and privilege to welcome 3 amazing speakers who I'm going to invite to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start by inviting Professor Bree Hadley to introduce yourself, if you would, Bree. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bree Hadley. I'm coming tonight from Turrbal and Yagara land in Meanjin, Brisbane. And I'm a person who has difficulty describing what I do because I do many and several things. One thing is I'm a professor in drama at Queensland University of Technology, which is multiplicitous in and of itself. I have the fortune of being able to work as a teacher with young and emerging artists in drama and in multiple art forms. To do research with communities in performing arts, visual arts, screen arts, to work with artists and organisations about access and inclusion, and to advocate as well. And so I sometimes phrase it that I have difficulty staying in my lane a little bit, in the sense that I think what I do is driven by social justice more than boundaries across art forms necessarily. And it gives me the opportunity to work with a range of different people who are interested in innovation and pushing the boundaries and thinking about what we can do in terms of self-expression, and in terms of the industrial relations that underpin self-expression. and the way in which we can create change and track change that's happened over time and change that still needs to happen in the future, maybe. And I'm going to pass over to Jo now. He's coming from a very different space and place tonight.
Absolutely. I'm coming from a tiny city in the UK called Wakefield. My name is Jo Verrent. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman, 1 year off 60, which I can't quite believe. I know! I've got a blue t-shirt on and earrings, which I'm very proud of. They say tired. They're my favourite earrings because I'm continually tired. I'm a hearing processing user, so that if I need to understand anybody in the room, I will stop the conversation and ask them to repeat if I haven't captured it on the captions, or I don't use Auslan, I use BSL in the UK. I'm the director of an organisation in the UK called Unlimited, and Unlimited supports and champions disabled artists to create exceptional work that goes on to challenge and change the cultural sector worldwide. And we will say we'll be here for as long as we're needed, and then we want to close and bugger off so we can go and do other things. Like Bree, I do a range of different things within my kind of daily work life, from nagging arts organisations to improve what they do, supporting disabled artists to improve what they do, and managing a wide range of team, throughout the whole of the organisation to do brilliant things with all of those people. And I'm going to introduce Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name's Michelle Ryan. I am a white woman with her hair slicked back, blue glasses on, and classic arts black shirt on. And I'm coming to you from the Ghana Nation, and I always like to acknowledge that the First Peoples were the first dancers, singers, artists on this land, and we will always walk with respect in their footprints. So I am the artistic director of Restless Dance Theatre here in Adelaide. We like to try and create work that's bold and beautiful but provocative. I have the great pleasure of working with artists who I would love to get to a point where I don't have to say disabled artists, but with artists with disability who really invest their time and their passion, but also their skill to create works that are on a professional level that have been seen in Australia and overseas, then also championing career pathways in the arts for artists with disability, ranging from workshops that start from, I think it's 8 years old, right through to 65 plus, if you like. And yeah, I'm also a wheelie, and so I find it's really interesting that sometimes you don't have to say much, you just have to turn up, and people realise that there's conversations that need to be had. And I'll hand back to Caroline.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a very good point. Sometimes we just need to be there and be present. Obviously, feedback plays a role in every one of your jobs, in what you do. But I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about how feedback feeds into your work or plays a role in your work, and why is it important, or even I would say essential, to the development of artists, of arts practice, and of the art form generally. Whoever wants to start can start.
It's not like us all to hang back.
I know.
So Unlimited, we commission artists. So we standardly maybe support 8 or 9% of people who apply. So that means there's 91 or 92% of people who apply who don't get funded. We can't feed back to all of them, but we do feed back to those who get through to a second stage in more detail, and that's absolutely essential. If people have put significant effort into an application, which is why we do a two-stage kind of process, less effort at the beginning, more effort later, people need to know where they're going wrong. And it's not actually they're going wrong, it's often about a balance of other factors, and people need to know that. But people also need to know if they're making significant errors when they're applying for something, so that they can go on and do better in the future, or so that they can redirect their artistic skills in a different direction. And the same applies with work. It's kind of like, I think we have to be really clear, first of all, about whether we're the right person to give an opinion. And if we are, and we have an opinion, we have to give it in a way where it's going to be heard and actioned, i.e. not on the opening night of an event.
Jo, can I just pick up on something that you said about we need to determine if we're the right people to give feedback? What determines that? How do we identify if we're the right people to give feedback?
I think that there's something for me about, are we the audience for the work? Because if I'm not, is it my personal opinion, or is it something that I have a right to comment on? So, for example, there is a strand of work in the UK, live art, which I love. I'm very involved in. There are elements of live artwork that are not for me. Bloodletting, really not my cup of tea. Masturbating with candles seems to be in a lot of work. Really not my thing. Do it in your bedroom. I don't want to go and pay money and buy a ticket for it. But other people love it and lap it up. Now, if you've created a piece of work with those things in it, I am not the person to critique it, because my opinion is just my opinion. I can talk about your set, I can talk about your dramaturgy, I can talk about your stagecraft, but I will have a visceral and emotional response to that work that isn't the same as some of your core audience may have. I cannot judge that work appropriately. The same with work for under 3-year-olds. My grandkids are all teenagers. I can't bring along a child, unless I steal one, to go and see a piece of kids' theatre and comment appropriately. It's not my opinion that's needed, it's somebody else's. So there's something for me about who the audience for the work is, and separating out a professional opinion from a personal, this is the type of work I like. Otherwise, we will just endlessly fund work in our own personal tastes, and that way is a really diminished cultural sector.
Thank you. There is so much in that we might come back to. Bree or Michelle, how does feedback, you're doing it every day?
Shall I start this one, Bree? Are you happy for me to go?
Yeah.
Well, I think as a choreographer and an artistic director, I feel like it plays a huge role. It's how we kind of evolve and how we push the work and the dancers. But for me, I find feedback really useful. But it has to be honest and it has to be thoughtful. And I don't need the flattery. I just need to find out feedback so that I can be better and hopefully create better work. As disabled artists, I feel like feedback is sometimes clouded with, the nice well-being politeness. And I suppose that's what you call, Caroline, the fluff. That fluff usually comes from a good place, but actually it doesn't do anything for anyone. It really doesn't serve us to actually create better work or to be better artists. And, I just think serious engagement with that feedback is important, but it also, as you said, it's who you ask that feedback for. I have to say I've got quite a few, what would you say, strong-minded people around me, or actually quite brutal at times. But at the same time, that's gold. Those people are gold. Those people who I trust, who know the work, who know what you're trying to do, to actually have really honest conversations. I had a beautiful creative producer, Ros Hervey, who passed away last year. And she used to always come into the studio and she'd say to me, if she felt the tingle, she knew it was good. And I would just look over at her and I'd say, and she would say, no, you need to make it better. And so at the time, it kind of destroyed me slightly, but it then made me think and just go, oh, yeah, okay, I could look at that from a different angle. So it's having those critical friends that, and, you know, that they are encouraging you to create and to improve as an artist, which I think is really great. So, yeah, I think it's really important to model that critical feedback so that it becomes more normalized. And you know, those conversations can still be respectful and meaningful, but could lead to like artistic and cultural change. But yeah, brutal at times.
I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking back over the years on how many different feedback identities or roles that I've had. I spent 5 years back in the day as a reviewer for a newspaper, which was one feedback identity. Perhaps not the newspaper people would expect me to be a reviewer for. I was told I was a kind of a silent assassin who'd start nice and could turn the knife at mid-point during a review. I was a judge for the theatre awards up here for a while. I have been a mentor in like formal mentor, like that you get an award for a grant that involves having a mentor. I've been on the awarding committees that the peer assessors that decide who gets the mentorship grants and other grants. I have been obviously in teaching situations a lot of times where you are doing forms of feedback that are engaged with how you approach a range of different tasks, from making work to making grant applications. And they all are slightly different feedback identities in terms of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. And I'm thinking to what you said, Jo, about who is the right person and was the right thing to do at the time. And I think a lot of what I'm trying to do today, thinking about different audiences, and some of what I'm trying to do sometimes, it's the deaf or disabled or neurodivergent artist and how you're trying to approach that person and what they need to make better work. But other times it is the assumption of the person who doesn't identify and what they think is good work, and trying to push that a little bit as a different audience, and people who are coming with, and it's not necessarily from a bad place, it's from a culturally trained place, but coming with a little bit of a savior complex in that they have a proposal for something that's great. And it's not just that, it could be work with Indigenous communities or queer communities, or work that's intersecting in some way, and trying to push something that's a little bit knight in shining armor is coming. So it's in the grant assessor or in the teacher, and thinking about who do we bring into the room to provide that feedback, whether it's a grant panel or whether it's a teaching group. You can bring together a group of people in your teaching group as much as you can in your panel. That's a mixed group of people who bring different points of view. I'm thinking about a speech that I sometimes give in a teaching context that goes along the lines of, you would think I would be the person who would have the right to speak, but don't remember that even though I look like the disabled person, look at the white face, look at the education, look at the needles of privilege, if that makes sense, but don't forget the kind of lateral violence within our own community as well, that there's always room for multiple voices in that conversation.
Thank you. I'm really interested. Feedback's been a really interesting thing throughout my career. And I think as a training dancer, it was always really hard to get feedback to allow me to be a better dancer, because mostly I was taught by non-disabled dancers. I was the people that were standing at the front of the class, literally, were doing something with a body that looked so very different to mine, and had no understanding of how, or less understanding of how my body worked in relation to theirs. And so there was a real reluctance to give me feedback or push me to do better. And I'm really interested, as we are a group of disabled leaders, do you think we can give different feedback, or that we give feedback differently to disabled artists than our non-disabled colleagues could or do?
I think if you take that, like that line about fluff, I think we can cut through the fluff faster because we know that feedback is important. I mean, sometimes disabled people are deemed marvelous because we brush our teeth,
Yeah.
and there's bunting comes out, there's poppers going up all over the place. It's kind of like, and if you've grown up as a disabled person with that kind of celebratory fluff for any tiny thing that you do, you are told you are marvelous, however shit or crap your art is.
Yep.
You're
Yep.
told you're marvelous. So the first time you encounter someone going, it's not, or it could be better, I think that can be really, really hard. I think it's much easier if it comes from another disabled person, because quite often the overpraise is because you're a disabled person, and it's coming from well-meaning non-disabled people who are trying to encourage, but are actually not doing so with a kind of a rigor that most non-disabled people would have already met. So we start from often a little disadvantage in that we're less prepared for it. And I think having a disabled person make that critique can be really helpful, because it's peer. It's not necessarily somebody, and it's somebody who will get that and understand that, and hopefully therefore deliver feedback in a way that it can be heard, rather than in a way that scars you for life, which I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of as well. I'm fascinated by Bree's experience as a theatre reviewer, because I think that reviewing for a wide public audience in that immense visible domain, and that must be really fascinating, where you draw the line of what you say and what you don't say. What would you say personally that you wouldn't say in print? All of that. But yeah, I think that we have a responsibility to do it differently in order to support the development of arts. We want arts by disabled people to be the absolute best it can be. We have to be better than the mainstream in order to be able to be taken seriously. That's not fair, but it's the case. And actually, bad work really diminishes what we're trying to do. And we've all seen bad work being elevated beyond its actual artistic nature, and that is really, really damaging. So I think it's twofold. We need to do it, and we can do it better because we have a wider range of that kind of knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've got a couple of things that just went off in my head, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I'll try to. I think it's also having a culture around that understands what feedback is, because I know with my dancers at Restless, when we first started giving feedback about, whether a technical thing or like whether it was a technical thing or whether it was a feeling, the dancers at first thought they had done something wrong. And it was very much, we had to really instill in them that actually getting notes and getting information was actually powerful, because then you could then improve. And so it actually took a while to actually build that culture into the company. But also it's about, I think too, that it's about conversations about what are you measuring? Because for non-disabled norms, it's about precision and perfection and virtuosic kind of things. But where is the excellence in, say, innovation, or in emotional depth, or connecting with an audience, and storytelling? Because I think of some amazing dance companies that have all this technique, but they don't connect to the audience. So which is the greater? So I think there's places for both, but yeah, yeah, I just think that we all need to be curious and engage in those conversations. And yeah, so sorry if I've gone off tangent there, but yeah, I just find
No, not at all. I'm really interested, and maybe this is going off tangent, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you, because I'm wondering about whether or not disabled artists think about their audiences more than non-disabled artists do. In our making, are we thinking more about who's going to view this work, how they might view this work, more than non-disabled artists might?
I think sorry, I'll just keep going. I think it's I don't know if it's necessarily different, because it depends on the personality. If you're a show pony, you're a show pony whether you're a disabled artist or non-disabled artist. I'm a show pony, like, before and after acquiring disability. And then there's other people, like I think in my company, that have that emotional thing that they want to connect with someone. So they're going to connect with either the audience or the person they're dancing with. I personally love it when they forget about the audience and they are just absolutely connecting with each other. So, yeah.
I would say that sometimes it depends so much on the individual artist and potentially the art form as well. Because again, within applications, who is this work for? Everybody. Really?
Yeah.
Really? Very, very little work is for everybody. Most work has a target audience. I don't think most artists, certainly at the beginning of their careers, understand that or actually know. And I think it probably takes a number of years and a number of kind of iterations of work for people to work out who their work is for. And also, again, if you're a disabled artist that's been brought up in the way that most disabled artists are, you've only shown work to family and mates. That's all the platforms that you've had. So you haven't really had the opportunities to work out who your audience is. So I think there's a bigger question there. Do you know who your audience is? Do you know what work you're making? Do you know who you're making that work for? That's a journey. Once you've got to that point and you do know, are you testing it with that audience? The best point of feedback for me, the kind of point in the journey, is when you've got you've had an idea, you've got something that's half formed, half baked. You might have a few elements of it. You might have a couple of paintings, or you might have a couple of scenes, something like that. Then show it to an industry audience who can give you the feedback about whether it will hit the mark for their audience and what you would need to do in order to build that engagement. Because then you've still got time to tweak and develop it further. If you save that industry sharing for your opening night, you really are screwed, because if people kind of go, actually, you need this, that, and the other, well, you've used all your rehearsal time, you've used all your budget, you're about to go out on tour. And there is nothing worse from being in a show and being given masses and masses and masses of notes and changes after opening night. I've been there, I was a performer, it's an absolute nightmare. So I think artists have to really think about when they invite that critical feedback in as well. Never tell anyone their shit on opening night. All you need on opening night is marvelous, darling, and find something positive to say. The curtains
A
were
24-hour rule after opening night. You can't do it before 24 hours.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, where reviews really play in, because that's where they come in, and that's why they can be quite deadly.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years, but also have feedback on over the years, is, and it comes from being in a world of people who've had more formal training, and also in a world of disabled artists who haven't had formalized training, is that people who've had formalized training know that kind of stuff, that they know methodologies for feedback during the making process and methodologies for engaging in how to not read the reviews on opening night and things like that. And I've been over decades in rehearsal rooms of people, not disabled artists, artists generally, who reacted poorly to feedback because it's come through a methodology that's not the methodology they trained in, of how to receive it and things like that. But if you're a person who hasn't engaged in an art form methodology training or a tertiary methodology training, it can be really confronting. And that's common for disabled artists to not have come through those methodologies to know how to receive that necessarily. And it, I think, makes a real difference. And when you overlay that with the experience people have had of what you're saying, Michelle, about it feels like you're in trouble, because if you've come through certain school systems, and I don't know if it's the same in the UK necessarily, but if it resonates in certain ways with the way a school or a support worker, like, you don't know how to interpret it. Whereas if you come through a particular, a dance training methodology or theatre training methodology, that okay, we're flipping into this. And then you overlay the thing. I was reading recently about even as simple as demonstrating something front on versus back on versus side on, so that you can understand what's being shown to you. It's very easy to put you off kilter, that you don't even know how to interpret what's being shown to you as a suggestion or a different interpretation. And certainly everything in the kind of research we do is that all the tertiary training and things like that would teach you how to take feedback, not welcoming, inclusive, accessible at present time. Might be different in other countries where they have different programs and things like that.
Well, I was going to say, I also think it links to different people's access requirements. So, with some people who are neurodivergent, might have rejection sensitivity disorder, or syndrome, and giving feedback in those instances where it feels like a physical pain, if you are told, if you're rejected in any way, or there's any kind of critique or criticism of what you're doing, then it has to be done incredibly carefully. And people don't always know that that's part of their neurodivergence. They just might have always taken criticism badly. But actually doing a little bit of digging, finding that out, working out, and we've had people where we've offered feedback one-to-one rather than in a written form, because actually having that personal contact means that we can gauge just how deep to go at one stage. So you might end up having 3 meetings. At each one, you're able to go just that little bit kind of deeper. We've had a couple of people that we've told sooner rather than later, because that engaged waiting has just been too damaging for them. So bearing in mind access within those conversations, I think giving feedback to deaf people through an interpreter that they know and trust, and who really gets the way that they think, is absolutely essential, because any translation in that process can, you might be as nuanced as you want, but the interpreter might say, they said you're shit. And you might then take that in a particular way. But all of that has to be considered in relation to working with disabled artists. So it's not just what we say, but it's how we say it, when we say it, and who we say it through is really important. As well as then, people might hear it in the moment, but won't necessarily be able to remember it. So providing something that is in writing or recording or something that people have in a digestible form to take away with them, that is future focused. If you were doing this again, or this is how you could improve, rather than a detailed, this is a list of what you got wrong.
And I mean, I come from a context of dance. So, it's also knowing when you give feedback to the dancers, what is their best way of interpreting and learning. So if for some people it is absolutely you need to show, because by verbalizing, you didn't do this. If you could change moving from here to the here in a certain way, unless you actually show them physically, it doesn't work. Other people need to, it need to be very, very clear and less words, but concise words that yes. So that's something that I'm kind of learning at the moment too. So, it's about whenever you've got someone new that you're working with, trying to work out what is their best method of learning and understanding, and how can you support that and change your practice to be able to best support them.
Yeah, it just reminds me of that thing about access is so relational. It's so, yeah, it's about relationship, and yeah, it's crucial in this. Can we talk a little bit about expectation? Because obviously, in all of this, in giving feedback, and we've touched on it a bit in terms of the fluff that surrounds disabled people, but do you think are our expectations different on disabled people than, or are disabled artists judged differently than on disabled counterparts? Do we think? Are the expectations lower, higher? Jo, you said we have to be better. Like, we have to be better because the spotlight's on us.
Yeah. Okay. In the background, somebody is washing my windows and the dog is barking. Yeah. So bear with me over the next 5 minutes. Who knows what will happen? I think there is an assumption for some audiences that every disabled artist is the same. So you see one disabled artist, you have seen all the disabled artists on the entire planet. Therefore, the weight on a disabled artist is the weight of our whole community. So I do think that the expectations are slightly different, but I also think that depends on the platform. If we program something in a professional festival along with other professional pieces of work, there is an expectation that that is a professional piece of work. And quite often we program work in progress, or we program work that's been rehearsed every third Wednesday when there's a full moon, or we program work that somebody has done. I was going to say in their bedroom, but actually I've seen some really brilliant work that has been created in that environment. In fact, in all of those environments. So I think there's something about, yes, the expectations are different. And the way that we counter that is being really crystal clear about the context, where that work has come from and the stage that that work is at. And to get that over to an audience. However, when an audience sees a piece of work, however clear we've set a context, they may not use that context to moderate how they view that work. When you see work, you still have a reaction to that work, but hopefully it should moderate feedback of that work, because you should be taking that context into account. I think we as a community also have expectations of disabled artists that are sometimes unrealistic. And there are disabled artist superstars, that are out there now. And there is an expectation that every disabled artist will be like that. And actually, quite a lot of disabled artists don't want to. Quite a lot of artists generally choose the different ways in which they work. There's a brilliant artist in Wakefield, where I live, who chooses only to ever work at a community level in community projects. That's where they find their joy. They don't want to do anything more with their art than that. And when you get used to that, and that is exactly what they want to do, you view their work in a different way. It's not a step towards something. It is that as its finished outcome. So it's quite a complicated question, but generally I would say yes, there are bigger expectations. And also I think different people, if I go and see a piece of work, often I have to really hide, because if people see me there, they will then ask my opinion, and allegedly it carries more weight. I am one person. I have one set of opinions. I come from the privileged background that I come from. That does not give my opinion more weight than somebody else's, which is why the majority of unlimited selection is done by an open panel, which is you apply to be on, and I have nothing to do with it. We don't want a world filled with work that's made by one person's opinion. That would be so redundant.
As fellow Australians, Michelle and Bree, do you think, where do you think, I mean, Jo's talked about high expectations on disabled people. Do you think that's the same here?
Sorry. And you've heard this story before, Caroline, so forgive me for repeating, but about in 2017, Restless presented a show in the Adelaide Festival. And it was interesting because at that point for Restless, that most of the audiences were family and friends. And so we had this opportunity in the Adelaide Festival, and I chose to not use the word disability in any of the copy. And it wasn't out of, embarrassment or anything like that, because I was proud of our dancers. But it absolutely changed the audience that we got. And we got, 600 Adelaide Festival goers to see our show. And the overwhelming comment was, wow, they're actually really good. And it drove me insane. So, but it was education. It was a way of going, they are actually very good dancers because we train, they train, they put in all the hard work as any other artist. So I felt at that point that everyone had very low expectations of artists with disability. Maybe we haven't got that cultural background that the UK has. That I think the Olympics and the Unlimited really set up really strongly. So that's always been something that I like, has driven me a bit insane. So I have this saying now that I want people to expect excellence and not be surprised by it, because that's something that I really believe. The other way around is that sometimes then you feel the pressure as a disabled artist to really put out good work, so that so it's being seen that you can have the community work, which is absolutely important, and that's your base. From nothing else is going to happen unless it starts at that community level. But you can have a trajectory that can potentially make you one of the superstars, but not everyone makes that superstar, but to have a relevance and an importance and a voice in the artistic landscape, for a daggy word, but anyway, in Australia is really important.
Bree, thoughts?
Ask in a slightly different way about expectations, and I know you've engaged this, Caroline. I think additionally here, and I'd be interested to know if it applies in other countries, and I think there's cultural factors that play into it for us, is there's a weird thing about expectations on ourselves about are we even, and I say this as a person who does use canes and crutches and wheelchairs and hearing aids, are we disabled? Are we disabled artists, particularly for neurodivergent people? That puts this weird kind of like, are we disabled enough? Are we disabled? Like, it comes partly from NDIS putting weird ideas about who's disabled and who's not, and trying to separate ourselves amongst ourselves, and what we should be able to do and not do. And I think it impacts expectations about who can do what in a rehearsal room and who can do what in a outcome in an exhibition or a performance as well. That can be really detrimental to people in terms of like those expectations around how many days a week work, how many shows in a run, how long is the show that you're running, and things like that, what you can and can't do. And when that hits the Australian context of like, no, you can't get NDIS and things like that, that puts in weird self-doubt into, even in a context where like the most unemployed are the neurodivergent folks and things like that, creates really strange things, and it's an interesting cultural moment around that and who we see represented. And then some of the artists, although we represent here, a lot of people come from performing arts background, we don't see a lot of good feedback, review, critique of people who are coming from visual arts background and things like that. We don't see those artists collected. There's people who have massive bodies of work that are not collected in that national galleries and things like that, who would possibly have the similar feeling about, well, why is that work not held in collections and exhibited and things like that. So I don't know, Caroline, I know you've thought about those things before.
Can I just say, I think it's really important. That's another reason for me why it's really important that disabled people engage within the whole concept of critique. Because if it's just industry feeding back on work, then work will be designed to fit the neat little boxes that industry have. One of the real strengths, I think, of kind of disability arts globally is that we're really good at breaking those boxes down and therefore creating new forms or new innovations within forms, often based around access, but not always. Sometimes it's based around the touring methodology. So, you know, who decided we had to tour 5 nights in a row? No idea. Or other things like that. And I think only by involving disabled people within that critique can we actually start to break some of that down. So having said we need the industry sharings to talk about the audience, we also absolutely need disabled experienced people in order to be able to spot those artistic breakthroughs and be able to, because those people who are making those will meet a lot of negativity. People don't like form changing. People don't like, you know, because it challenges everything that they know. But if we can go, yeah, actually, you're really onto something here. That brought me the tingles. That gave me goosebumps. That actually was something I love work that is fresh, that I've never seen before. I love people who take my breath away with their audacity. I love all of that. I'm not interested so much in polish or you know, precision. I like things to be kind of raw and innovative. So I can watch out for that. And I love going up to people. Having said, I often hide at performances. Sometimes if I do see something, I will go up to somebody and go, I think what you're doing is really, you know, innovative. It's not there yet. It's not perfect, you know, it's whatever, but you've got something there that's really important. Don't lose it. And we absolutely need a bit of that too. But other people might see that thing and think it's shit.
But that's it, isn't it? Like, that's this whole conversation is about, it's all about judgment and it's all about opinion, and critiques, as lots of you have said, are one person's opinion on something, and we take it to heart so much.
There are times when I have to not give feedback because my feedback is dictated by my personal circumstances at a time, and those things really colour your work. And I was really reminded of that when I saw the same piece of work 3 different times by an established disabled artist, I won't say who, and I had it was exactly the same work, and I had 3 completely different responses to it, and it was all based from loving it to hating it, and it was all based on where I was in my emotional stability at those 3 points. And I always kind of come back to that now when I see something that I don't like and think, yeah, what was I bringing to it, as well as what was I taking from it.
Such a good point. I often think about that, and I think as artists, we often imagine that audience come in as a blank slate, like they're just coming in and they're just happy to sit and watch whatever might be on stage. And it's like, we have no idea what they've experienced en route to get there, what else is going on in their lives, what is happening in their. It's just, it fascinates me. Anyway.
But that's also why venue access is so absolutely critical for disabled people, because if we've had a shit journey, if the access is crap getting there, if the access is crap when we are there, whatever we go and see, our experience is tainted by that. It takes an exceptional piece of work to enable me to forget those things and just be in the moment with the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
In some ways, that can be an interesting, I'm thinking of all the occasions where you say, particularly to students in a teaching context, this is the work that I'm about to show you, these are the things in it. On some days, you've had that day coming in here, and it might not be the day for you to engage these works. And that's fine. You're welcome to go out, and we'll let you know when we're done. You can come back. And sometimes it's work by disabled artists, sometimes it's a work by whatever artist it's by, and that's totally fine. And that can be interesting if you engage a work and it hits you a certain way on a certain day because of a certain resonance in the work. And in giving the review or the feedback, that can be part of it, assuming you can get in a room. But I think you're right, you need to be honest about that, if that's part of your interpretation of it. If you're dishonest and you skip over that bit of it's registered this way with me due to these reasons, and you just give a blanket, this is what it is, and don't share that part, that's disingenuous for, especially if it's public feedback that you're giving.
I think there's something too about feedback being, where possible, two-way. So when we give feedback, particularly on applications or whatever, if we're giving it face to face, it's a conversation. And actually, people quite often don't want to hear what you want to say. They want to express their disappointment if they've not got something, or they want to, I think that's where I have such a fear of, newspaper reviews and that, because it can never be a conversation in the same way that other elements of feedback can and should be. I love R&D sharings where you've got a really engaged audience and everybody is involved in conversation. You're learning about the work as much as you are giving an opinion or feedback on the work. So I think where possible, making that an active dialogue, because then you can be nuanced and you can respond to how you can see the artist is taking. If they're becoming really crestfallen, then you can bring in a degree of positivity, or you can bring in something about future planning, or this might work for this audience. But when you're doing that without the person in the room, it's much, much harder to judge the degree of sensitivity that you might need. Not so that you just don't offend someone, but so somebody can hear what is being said. It's amazingly difficult to listen to feedback and actually take something from it. I think there's a thing that you have to hear 7 positive things to outweigh 1 negative thing. You know, so if you have a review or whatever and it's got a whole load of positives in, you will only ever remember the one line. It's like, Michelle, can you remember anything else in that review apart from that one line? Just that one.
Exactly.
So yeah, balancing that out and making it a dialogue where possible, I think is really important.
I also find it quite fascinating too when you like just even not so much feedback, but when you go and see a work of art and that there's conversations with you and your friend, and you're both interpreted something completely different, and that's what I hope art does, is that it has these makes conversation about what did you feel, what did you see, and sometimes it's like flabbergasted, and they're like going, oh my God, really? Or yeah. And then it does then feed back into what sort of day you've had, or what you've been thinking, or what you've been through as a person. And yeah, it's, I mean, fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. We have obviously talked a lot about feedback. We've talked a bit about critical friends and having people around us. We know we need cheerleaders, but we also need people that will be honest with us, as brutal as that can be at times. Which makes me think about the importance of allies. And we know that we won't always, the importance of allyship. And Bree, you've done a load of work around authentic allyship, because we know about performative allyship, or maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because we see quite a lot of that. But what would you, what's the research that you've done around allyship, and what did you find, and how can we be better allies and do it more genuinely? That's a lot of questions, sorry.
It is. The headline is cultural safety, and that people don't necessarily feel culturally safe. People don't necessarily feel, here at least, that the policy and the explicit statements about desire for inclusion is hitting the ground in any particular way. And what we were talking about before, about the idea that if you were to give feedback, you would do it in particular ways that would be adapted, that you would do it in person versus in a piece of paper, or you would do it with an interpreter and things like that, that any of that would actually happen. That you would change the schedule, that doesn't actually happen. People feel that, on the contrary, that people might have a policy or an action plan or something like that. But in a lot of instances, nothing changes in the actual world of educational environments particularly, but also some of the theatre companies. The biggest difference people seem to see is where some of the main stage organisations actually go into collaborations with companies like Restless or Unlimited, that there is some actual learning from the experience of long-term engagement with disabled artists, that builds up some of that competency, for want of better words, which comes back to, I suppose, disability-led practice to build safety. I don't know if that's the same experience in the UK.
We have, I think it's really patchy. I think there are some brilliant examples of exceptional allies within the cultural sector in the UK. And then I think everybody else is in exactly that position of, patchy, incomplete, unthought through, some willingness to try, some absolute fear. But the cultural sector here at the moment is incredibly under-resourced and stretched. You know, we're going through a lot of very difficult situations at the moment financially as a country due to some really, really shit decision making by those in power. So I find it quite hard to blame kind of venues and their governance entirely, because I don't think they're being supported structurally. I think the best thing the UK did was to bring access and inclusion for funders of the arts, to bring access and inclusion into their funding agreements. So it is written into receiving funding from Arts Council England, Arts Council of Wales, Creative Scotland, etc., that you need to do something around access and inclusion. It's one of Arts Council and England's investment principles is around equality and relevance. So it means everybody has to do something. The degree of something really depends on the resources that you have, the history that you have, the context that you have, the vision that you have, etc. But I think you're absolutely right. Through doing genuine partnership working, that should leave a legacy within policy, practice and procedure. Any partnership that doesn't have a legacy is not a partnership.
And what you see here that is looks to be the most promising thing of all is you have a few really long-term allies who've worked for such a long time and had such long-running companies with long-running ensembles that they're now, I've been calling it sprouting for one of, I took the term sprouting from the No Buy Facebook groups that they have, that when the groups get too big, they sprout into different groups for suburbs. So they start out as like 3 suburbs, then they're too big. So they have 3 different ones for 3 different suburbs sprout off. That they've got a company, an ensemble that's been running for a long time, and then they support particular artists within it to go off and do their own work with the platform that is the long-running company as a kind of a production hub, not necessarily called a production hub, but the long-running company has the understanding of what's required for training, for access, for support, and then it supports the artist to go off and do something that could be in the same dance or theatre genre, but it could be in another genre. It could be a film project or something like that. And it's almost like that produces the new work, or it produces the artist that becomes known as an independent artist. And it's through that long-running work, and then eventually it starts to come into festivals or partnerships with other organisations in the city, and those artists start to have a profile.
I think absolutely see that, but I also see that extend into ownership. With those companies owning that artist, and that artist not being able to go and collaborate with other companies or other organisations, particularly around learning disabled artists, who the companies appear to feel they own because they are the ones they've trained with, they are the ones they've grown up with. So I absolutely see that. But yeah, there's a slightly worrisome thing for me around the ownership of people, because a non-disabled artist can go and work with who the hell they like.
Yes, the portfolio careers thing, which hasn't been the case historically here. There's, yes, it would. So I don't personally know all the ones that we can see here. The ones that I do know certainly have their own agency, but it would be interesting to track whether all of them have the agency over their own work. But because it's such a transition from people always working in ensembles.
Yeah.
Historically, and because there's so much complaint about not having access to any other training route.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we are starting to see more of here, particularly within the mainstream arts, is essentially what Unlimited does and did at the beginning, Jo, is this idea about you could only apply for funding if you had a presenting partner. So it was part of I suppose the creative leadership still had to sit with the disabled artist, but you had to have a presenting partner alongside for that exchange to happen and that crossover of learning. And that, I think that's one of the major successes, would you say, Jo, of Unlimited?
Yeah, we don't do it all the time now because it is a success, but it is also a limitation because not everybody can get that in place before their work is known. We now split it into working with partners. So we have a partnership round and then we have an open round.
Yeah.
In a partnership round, we have found presenting partners and they have got tight briefs, and then we're opening their minds and their doors to a range of new artists. And being part of this process with us means they get to meet a whole range of different artists who might apply to that opportunity. They then shortlist, so they get more involved with maybe 3 or 4, and then they select one. But actually quite often that presenting partner goes on and works with the others in the shortlist too, because they've become excited by their practice. In our open rounds, anybody can apply to do whatever they want. The strongest applications are still often with those who come in with presenting partners, particularly if people are looking for a lot of money. If you're looking for, 50, 80,000 pounds, and you don't have a way of bringing your work to audience, nobody's going to give you that. It's kind of like bringing your work to an audience through the established networks, unless your network is something entirely different. You're presenting work in swimming pools, which we've had artists do and we've funded artists to do. There isn't the consolidated swimming pool venue association does not exist, but you can work through local authorities. You can, there's a range of different ways you can work through to find that. So you would at least have to apply with a couple of pools that were interested.
Yeah.
The touring model is still absolutely vital. We tend to very, very rarely fund things that are just one-offs unless they have another way of disseminating what they do. So occasionally a one-off has been disseminated by live streams or videos or books or kind of whatever. But the thing about seeing a disabled artist as somebody who performs or creates work that is seen in multiple venues, multiple contexts, as part of a career, that's what I think Unlimited is really there to do, to dispel the notion that we perform once a year at a gala that raises money for us, where the audience is people who come with a gaze of, didn't they do well? That's what we're not interested in. We're not interested in that kind of work. But anything else, particularly in our open rounds, bring it on. That's often where the most innovative work comes up.
And I think other than for established companies, as an independent artist, touring is not necessarily a thing that is in the thinking. Like there's, in my experience here, Michelle, you're all about the touring. Bree, maybe you've got other experience, but it's really rare for artists to tour.
Even for us, like we've been quite lucky with the model with the major festivals organization initiative, but because it almost feels like because we have been so successful in that it's now time for someone else. So it's actually then trying to find new ways of getting into venues. So yeah, it's still a struggle. And so as an independent art, I don't know how independent artists do it, because if you can't fit into that model of where the money pot is to tour, and often in Australia, we have this weird thing where, people want the premiere or they want the exclusive, and logistically and financially, that's just not viable.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
I think we're in Victoria, we've got a really good regional arts touring network that is trying its darndest, but yeah, it's just really hard. There's lots of issues around getting audiences, and yeah, so again, thinking about who's the audience, how are we tapping into that audience, where did that audience go?
And as soon as you use the words contemporary dance, already everyone goes running. But but I just it's about education, isn't it? Let's educate those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really conscious of time, so I would love us to think about finishing this incredibly rich conversation by any tips on how we could or should be giving better critical feedback, and how we can be better allies that we can leave with our colleagues and our friends.
I would say, if you're an artist, ask for feedback at a time when you can take it. So really set yourself up for that. As somebody seeing work, offer feedback when you are asked to, but not necessarily unsolicited feedback, because that can potentially be damaging. But 100%, as everybody said, you need to be honest, authentic, transparent, yet nuanced, and be kind. However difficult something is that you're going to say, be kind.
Thanks, Jo. Bree, Michelle?
I always come back to, and we talked about this before, about your day. If you are going to go into development and you have to be present in that moment and try and give, again, honest feedback. And I agree with you, Jo, about kind. You don't have to be what's the word? Sorry, not a struggling artist. You don't have to suffer for your art. So yeah, having that support around you to actually be nurtured, and know that when people are coming to a showing or a development, they want to help. They want to be supportive. They don't go in with the mindset as the artist of going, oh, they're going to hate it. So it's you don't want the fluffy, oh, it's all wonderful. But if you set it up so and people understand, then hopefully it's a supportive environment that really honest feedback can be given.
Amazing, thanks. Bree, how can we be better allies or give better feedback?
In addition to being clear what the feedback is for, when it's what, we would differentiate between the formative, which is the research and development, and it's going to change something and, it's going to develop the work further, versus the summative, which it's saying, this is what we thought, and there's not really an opportunity to change it anymore. When we're thinking about how we can adapt the way we give feedback or how we do it to work better for deaf, disabled and neurodivergent folk, instead of thinking I'm going to reinvent the wheel on how I do it in my own mind from scratch, we can learn from this conversation that there's people that have been doing it for a long time, and that we can perhaps listen to people who have worked for a long time and people who identify, who can help us along the way, rather than just go in and do what we think may work. Or we could have a conversation with the people who are going to be receiving the feedback, because I think part of what can be challenging is our perception of the best way that will work that may fit strangely for people. So it's thinking about adaptive ways of giving feedback differently and who does the adaptations.
Yeah, interesting. And I think, Jo, one of the things that you said earlier that's really resonating with me, which is not necessarily about feedback, but is absolutely the importance of knowing who your audience is. Who are you making this work for? And how do you identify them and articulate that and involve them in the making process? Yeah, interesting. Thank you all hugely for your wisdom and insights and generosity. It's been a pleasure sharing space with you. Thank you also to our brilliant interpreters, Susan and Paul, for being here, and all the people who are behind the scenes making this happen today. If this is the first conversation that you've been here for or engaged with, please know that there are others and feel free to engage with them. They are also featuring fantastic speakers who have lots of insights and wisdom to share. We really hope to catch you all at our live conversation, which will take place during the festival. It'll be live and also it'll be hybrid. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you again for being here and stay warm.
Hosted by Cultural Equity Consultant at Melbourne Fringe, Caroline Bowditch. Panellists: Professor Bree Hadley, Faculty of Creative Industries, Education and Social Justice, QUT. Jo Verrent, Executive Producer of Unlimited UK. Michelle Ryan, Artistic Director, Restless Dance Theatre. Program Manager for Access at Melbourne Fringe, Millie Cooper. Edited by Rachel Edward. Audio and captioning by Alex Edward. Auslan interpreting by Paul Houston, Susan Emerson. Audio description by Rachel Edward. Presented by Melbourne Fringe, this project has been Fringe funded as part of Radical Access, supported by the Australian Government through Creative Australia, its principal arts investment and advisory body.